Hi, everyone. I'm Larry Buckland, pastor at Suncrest United Methodist Church. We want to welcome you to an episode of the Rambles on, and I'm happy to have my friend and cohort, Mark Markle, with us today. How you doing, Mark?
I'm doing great. Looking forward to the conversation.
I always do.
My first question has to do not with the sermon, but the service. At the beginning of it, you said that what was planned was changed for this Sunday because of what happened the day before at the former President Trump's rally. And I was curious to what was done and why.
Well, Angela, our director of music, actually reached out to me before I got to reach out to her, and I was very happy that she did. I was already planning to do that, but it was early Sunday morning, and I was going to give her till around 7 a.m. to message her to see if it were possible. I didn't know what she would think, but you know what? She texted me around 6:30 a.m.
Whoa.
And said, what do you think about us changing the prelude, changing the opening hymn? And it was just a tone of the prelude and opening hymn that were scheduled were a little bit, great, opening worship songs, upbeat. And we really believed to begin the morning of worship, we needed to be mindful of what had transpired the day before. I've done this before, quickly making changes because of the events in the news that are relevant to everybody that people would have known about. Not here, because we've only been here just a year, but we've done that before. And so I was so pleased that Angela reached out to me and said, can we make some changes? And I also overnight had been changing my message a little bit as well.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, had you actually changed your message?
Changed the message some, and then also changed my pastoral prayer for the morning to hopefully put us in a mind of prayer and peace, and hopefully to live out where I believe Christ calls us is to love all people and love our neighbor, and regardless of what side of the political aisle you might find yourself on, that a human life was attempted to be taken, and one definitely was.
Yeah.
And there were others injured.
Yeah.
And so it's something that I believe that we needed to acknowledge happened and pray for peace in our country and our world. I really believe that when you're preparing a sermon that, Scripture is where you start. But I also think, to go use an older term, because we probably don't do this as often, is the Bible in one hand, the newspaper in the other.
Oh, I've heard that before, but we carry out our faith in the world as it is today. And if we don't acknowledge what's going on, we miss a step, I think.
I hope that most people were okay with the changes, because we definitely took them seriously. And like I said, I'm just grateful for our leader, Angela, to reach out to make those changes so quickly.
I'm glad you worked together and did that. I think it was appropriate.
Thank you.
Now to your sermon. You want to give a brief on where this series is coming from for those who may not have listened to us before or been to the service?
Sure. We're doing a sermon series called The Gospel According to Ted Lasso. And Ted Lasso show is all about relationships. Before you go find that on Apple Plus TV, if you haven't seen it yet, I want you to know that it is a great television show, but it does have a lot of, I'll just say it, foul language in it. And so we are being creative, and I give thanks to the editing that's happening, to Lexi Thomas making some edits for us to play those clips during worship. And so I'm grateful for that. But it is it's a great show past the language about relationships and how to treat others. And it is about an American football coach that is brought to England to coach not American football, but the world's football, soccer, and does a Premier League team, and was brought there not to actually in thoughts of being a great soccer coach, but there was a divorce going on in the ownership of this team, and the wife, Rebecca, decided that she wanted to see her husband's team flounder and be a disappointment. So that was the idea for the show. But the show just takes off, and it's not really all about soccer. It's about relationships.
I have to tell you, having watched it now 3 times running, that there are some great soccer scenes in it. But you're right. It's about how do we get along with each other.
I love the soccer part because I love sports. I think you've found that out in the last year.
Oh, here and there.
Yeah, I love sports. So I loved taking the whole story and putting sports with it. And it's also helped me learn more about soccer, because soccer was not something that I played growing up, but I really enjoy it.
I actually coached two of my sons in soccer and
Oh,
learned
wow.
a lot about it. So
Yeah, that would.
I truly enjoy watching it. I have to tell you, a little more than football, but
No.
yeah,
I don't know about that part.
I'm sorry to disappoint you.
Maybe it'll grow because I have a feeling my soon-to-be 4-year-old is wanting to play soccer. So
Good for her.
I'll
Good for
probably
her.
learn a lot about it.
The second Chronicle verse that this series is based on, the word for this week was prayer. But you spent most of the time talking about kindness, and the title was Improving Communication. How does that fit together with prayer?
Well, there's part of those changes in the sermon, Mark, that we're not prepared. One of the things that we did do was we are basing the whole sermon series on 2 Chronicles chapter 7, verse 14, and I give Elise Chaffins, the author of the book, The Ted Lasso Relationship Guide, that if you haven't gotten it, look at Amazon and get that. She's a member of our church, loves Ted Lasso, and does a great job on this book about relationships. And she and her husband, Rich, play in our 11 a.m. worship experience, and they're just wonderful human beings. But besides that, get the book, take a read. But she is the one that shared her thought process of that verse to be able to summarize this whole series. And so we took a little phrase out of each, and the second week that we just completed was pray. And not that it's a bad thing, Mark, but we have at Suncrest talked a lot about prayer lately. And I started thinking about what else is that in the Ted Lasso show, which is not a Christian show either. What I believe what was happening is ways to improve communication. And I really believe that our prayer, our communication with God can be improved. And so taking a look at that. But after the events, the attempted assassination of former President Trump, I felt like we definitely needed a little dose of kindness to talk about, and how our world is so politically divided, and how much it would help us if we ushered in a little more kindness in the world. So you're exactly right. There were some changes there and some adjustments. So prayer became improving communication, which can be with God in our prayer life, and then also improving our communication with one another. And I believe probably if we're praying enough, I don't know if enough's the right word, but if we're praying, then hopefully we'll want to improve our communication. And while improving our communication, it'll also want to make us be a little bit more kind.
Well, you did point out that you and I can be Ted Lassos and how we offer kindness. But I have to admit, Ted has some dark sides to him. He's not always cheerful and buoyant, particularly in his relationship with his wife, Michelle, or his former wife at the end of the program, but also with some of the players. He's a person who has challenges, or doesn't really, in a character that he is a character. He doesn't have the challenges that we do of a full life, with challenges and rewards, bills, health issues. Is he kind of a Pollyanna? Do we have to be careful of not going too far, Ted Lasso?
Ted Lasso can be a little bit of a Pollyanna, if you will. I saw a write-up about that from a Christian perspective, a pastor writing about Ted Lasso is a little bit too Pollyanna for this writer. And I see where he's headed. However, I think, when we think about what Christ calls us to, and the ideal of sanctification. To me, sanctification is a part of grace that is a process. Here, don't I always somehow get to the kinds of grace when we do this podcast?
Yeah, I think we need to do a podcast on those kinds of grace.
Yeah.
Or at least you and I have a conversation about it.
Prevenient grace is the grace that before you even acknowledge it. Justifying is when you realize it, and then because of that, you want to continue to grow in that. And sanctification is that ideal. I don't believe we ever completely, as human beings, fully sanctified and that we're just completely perfect. However, I think it gives a picture of what we want to aspire to be. And I believe Ted Lasso is still yet human, showing some of those darkness. But the Pollyanna side is always that it seems to the forgiveness part and the love and the way he will respond and treat and the forgiveness that takes place is a little Pollyanna. But isn't that what we're called to do? I mean, Jesus said, how many times do we forgive?
70 times 7, which means forever.
Forever. Yeah, in one day it was what that was supposed to be, right? And so how many of us do that? We struggle with forgiveness. When it's something that has hurt us, we struggle with that. And so it's something that is an ongoing process and work. And sometimes forgiveness does not happen instantaneously, like we saw.
It takes time. It takes time and understanding and conversation, I think, from, if you use the example of Ted Lasso.
Yeah, exactly.
I think of the reaction between Jamie and the grumpy guy.
I know you're talking
Roy.
about. Yeah, Roy.
They started out at headbutting enemies, and then by the end they were supportive and encouraging to each other. It takes time.
And if you haven't watched yet, when you check out Roy, you'll understand why any scene with Roy would be a challenge to edit.
Yeah, that's true. He's a person who has constantly a chip on his shoulder, except in relationship with his niece.
Yes.
When his niece is in the picture, he shows a softer human side. He needs to do that more, as I think we do too.
Agreed.
Sometimes we get off on our own case. There was something I wanted to talk to you about. You talk about the big capital C church and how it has caused harms to other in the names of God. And how do we recognize when we are not on Jesus' side, but we are on our high horse or on our side? That's a tough call, but I think it's one we need to work at understanding.
It is. To be able to look with God's eyes it's hard to do because we don't have that. And however, when we think about what would break God's heart is what should break our hearts. And I feel like anyone that is being feeling unloved, marginalized, treated poorly, cast aside, when the church does that in any form, we are falling into that kind of sinful nature, if you will, to not love our neighbor. And we like to put a clause on who our neighbor might be.
Yeah, that's a real danger, I think. In some cases, we say this is our neighbor and that person is not. And God calls us to treat each of us as a child of God.
Right.
That means all of us are everyone's neighbor.
This morning, I was in a upper room disciplines Bible study, and we were doing the lectionary, and we were talking about, I think it was the passage that was given in Ephesians chapter 2, 11 to 22, I think. And it was talking about the reconciliation of God to humanity and how that we are all to be a part of that. Well, the author in the devotional book that we have talks about how sometimes that we, the church, can try to get excited about something that we have in our minds that should happen. And we can't wait. It's got to be done now. Whether it's build this building, build this ramp, build this or that, without talking to the people who need it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I actually have been in that situation more than once.
Yeah. And we mean well. It's all well intended. We're like, oh, I think they need this.
Right.
And a quick example of that is I love the culture of Suncrest United Methodist Church's giving in partnership with Scott's Run Settlement House, for example. And one of the things we will be doing later this fall is we will be giving so that we can provide Thanksgiving meals for those who are in need. And something that used to happen before COVID, my understanding, is that everyone got together and started putting these Thanksgiving baskets together.
Yes.
And so the people that were doing that, I can tell you, I've heard from them in the last year. They would love to get back together and do that again because they loved getting together. They love the feeling also, I believe, of doing that for someone else, which is all good. Nothing wrong with that. But we talked to the executive director at Scotch Run Settlement House at the open house on Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
And he told us, do you know what the people want?
What?
The people that are in need, rather than the basket, they like getting the gift card.
So they can make their own decisions about what they have for Thanksgiving.
I know it might surprise you, Mark, but there are residents in Monongalia County that might not want turkey for Thanksgiving.
I can understand that personally.
Really?
Yeah.
You don't like turkey?
I love turkey, but every now and then ham would be good too.
Yeah,
you know?
But you know what? It might not even be that. You also got to remember we're blessed. I believe we're blessed in Morgantown to have lots of diversity.
Yes, that's true.
And so there might be someone from a different land that does not have turkey or ham on Thanksgiving Day, something that's more related to their own culture. I tell people the same story all the time that my favorite side that we always had at my aunt's on Thanksgiving Day was not your Thanksgiving side, but it was just baked beans.
Oh,
I love baked beans. I don't eat them that often, but I love them. And then the other is, do you know what? I don't like pumpkin pie. I know.
No way.
I don't.
You haven't tasted my wife's.
Well, that's true. Okay. I'll have to try her pumpkin
Give it
pie.
a shot.
My mom supposedly, when I say supposedly, I know it's good. I hear all the people rave about it. She makes pumpkin rolls. I just don't really like pumpkin.
Well, I have to admit, my favorite Thanksgiving Christmas pie is mincemeat, not pumpkin.
I don't like that either, Mark. And you know what? There are very few foods that I don't like. And in this one podcast, we've nailed two of them. Pumpkin and mincemeat.
Well, I'll share one with you.
Okay.
Cilantro.
Oh, yeah.
Cilantro.
Do you have that?
It tastes like soap to me.
Yes. That's a real thing. I understand. I had never heard of that until about a year ago. There was a man at my last church that told me that story, and I didn't believe him. And I have come to find out that there are certain folks that their taste buds with cilantro, it tastes like soap.
Yep. Yeah. My oldest son and I share that. My other sons love it. So
yeah, I like cilantro.
It's just not something in my palate.
This was a good ramble.
Well, I'm going to close out with the clip that you played for the service. It was with Ted and Trent, a reporter who is kind of out to get him, I would think. And they're in this restaurant. Why don't you describe it?
Sure. Trent, the reporter there that covers the Richmond soccer team, is not feeling the same feel-good guy right now about Ted. He's trying to push him and tell him that he's actually he doesn't know if Ted realizes how much the people of Richmond care about this soccer team, and that Ted's not taking that seriously. But believe it or not, Trent's enjoying a little bit of the conversation, and even though he's still miffed by it, he also did not think it was a great idea as they're having Indian food that Ted tells the waiter, tell the chef, I'll take it the way you would fix it. I can tell you that can be a mistake.
Yeah.
Because a friend of mine, Jeremy Batten, and I, is actually the person that hosted this show when I did it before at my last appointment. He and I and my wife went to dinner here in Morgantown to an Indian restaurant, and he said the exact same thing. I'll take the lamb vindaloo the way you make it. I also ordered lamb vindaloo, and their scale is 0 to 10. I said, I'll take a 10. That's why I like it hot. Jeremy said, I'll take it the way you would make it for your family. I don't know what that number was supposed to be. All I can tell you is Jeremy took one bite. He couldn't eat it. He gave it to me. We traded.
Kind of like the Ted Lasso event, right?
It was, although Trent actually then, after couldn't eat it, Ted takes it and scrapes all the food onto his plate, and Ted is sweating. And as they're having this banter and this conversation, he asked Trent back, he says, well, what is it do you love? What do you love? Because Ted said, I love coaching. Whether it's American football or soccer, basically, I love coaching. And I love the opportunity to use what I do. And Trent then tells him, even though Trent's trying to get at him, he says, Trent, you're a very good writer. You must love writing. And he does. And then the waiter calls out and says, how do you like the food? And what does Ted do? He says, tell your father-in-law it is fantastic, basically. Delicious.
As he's sweating.
Yeah, he's sweating.
Blowing air through his mouth.
And the waiter yells back, Dad, they love it. They love it. And Trent's finally like, I got to go. And then there's some remarks that Ted basically is telling him about what's the bigger picture of this coaching job. Having relationships, not about wins and losses, but about the relationships on this team. And as Trent gets ready to leave, Ted says, I really enjoyed getting to be with you. I'm paraphrasing. I really enjoyed the talking. And Trent says, you mean that, don't you?
Yeah, you actually mean that, don't you?
Yeah.
And to me, that's one of the most powerful lines in the whole series. That Ted Lasso really means to be kind and to listen and to be open to other suggestions and to appreciate what they can bring to the team and to the events that are going on. That is a powerful statement. You really mean that. It raises the question in my mind, so I'm telling on myself, do I really mean what I intend when I say I believe in Christ, that the Spirit is in my life? I have to ask that question occasionally. I don't see it as a weakness. I see it as a strength, that we can question our faith and we can question our existence. But, Christ is always there. I cannot I cannot see the world without that.
I love that. Words are powerful, and sometimes we just nonchalantly say things, and sometimes even well-meaning, but we don't live that out or mean it. I used to give this example when I was in college to one of the campus ministers, and he and I would joke, when you're leaving someone, you might say something like, "Take care." Is that really take care, or see you later?
Right. I read an article recently and actually talked to the Ovcharenkos, our Ukrainian family we're sponsoring, about the differences between Europe and American in casual conversation. And we say, "How you doing?" And everybody says, "Doing fine." Many countries in Europe, if you say, "How you doing?" you're in for a half-hour conversation. This is what's going on, and they expect you to really understand what they're saying.
I'm glad you told me that, because I know I've asked Oksana and Andre, "How are you doing?" And I think they've given me the American answer.
I think they have learned what we do here.
Yeah.
But the European way gives you an opportunity to become part and parcel to somebody else's life, and they can become part and parcel to you. Opportunity, I think.
Yes.
Well, I want to close with the concept of the mustard seed. And that was the Bible verse, and that was the kind of the impetus of your original sermon, but it played throughout the whole thing. The mustard seed, as I heard you say, is listening. Be kind to each other, and it will grow. It's not the forward kind of thing. It's just be there, listen, be kind. I really appreciated this sermon this Sunday.
I appreciate that, Mark. The mustard seed reminds us that we may seem small by ourselves, but a little bit of kindness can go a long way of making someone else's day a little better. And then if we continue to do that, I believe that kindness can spread and grow, just like the mustard seed tells us in the scripture. It can grow to big branches.
You do not know whose life you touch and what impact it will have. So be kind. Listen. Right. I got one shout out I want to give before we close out. David Schofield.
Oh, my.
And his singing of Hold Out Your Light. I'm telling you, that brought tears to my eyes. He was an awesome. He was just, I don't know where he gets that voice, but it wasn't opera. It was from the heart. I really appreciated him.
I did too. I don't always do this, Mark, but I went back and watched. I got the pleasure of sitting right beside of him while he was singing. And if you go back and watch, you can just see me just kind of just like in the moment, kind of head bobbing a little bit and just moved by the song, by his talent, his gifts that God has given him, that I'm so grateful that he uses with us from time to time.
I am too. Message, let your light shine around this world. Something we need to keep in mind.
And the amazing thing, Mark, is amidst this series, as we said, we changed some things. There were a lot of things like that song that was already prepared, that was already in the bulletin in print. And I think it just really shined brightly the light that we need to be.
I agree. Well, that's the end of my notes. So
that sounds good to me. I think it's a good place to be, is that, friends, we invite you to do the same. In this world, what do we need? A little bit more kindness. You have the opportunity to be a light. And so we encourage you to share this podcast and subscribe and invite other people to be a part of the movement that we can, is to be more Christ-like, to be more kind in all that we do. So we hope everyone has a wonderful week, and be kind to someone. You never know where that will go.
Amen. See you next week.